Hey, everybody. Welcome to the guided assignment for chapter 14. This one wants us to do a comparative income statement for the first problem. And then on the second problem, it's going to have us do a comparative income statement, like a vertical analysis. So a horizontal and a vertical analysis. So really, when we do a comparative income statement, all we're doing is adding a couple columns. The first is the amount of the increase or decrease. And so to figure out the amount of the increase or decrease, we're just going to subtract the newer year, the most recent year, or actually we're going to subtract the older year from the newer year. So in this case, we'll say it was 700,000 in 2001 or 2021, however we're looking at that, and now it's 910,000. So the difference, 910,000 minus 700,000, will be 210,000. And we're just going to do that for each of these. So we could do that by hand with a calculator, or I just created a little Excel spreadsheet here where I've just put all of this information over into it. Took a few minutes to get it set up, but it will make our lives a lot easier when I say this equals the most recent year minus the older year, and then I can just fill that formula all the way down. So I think it's worth taking the time to put this info into Excel, so because then I can just do all the math really quick. But if you didn't want to do it, you could always do it just with a calculator. So there we go. All I did was subtract the older year from the newer year. I'll double check my work to make sure it's good. Oh, it didn't like any of my negatives. So, and that's actually because, I'm not sure why, because if you think about it, 350,000, 441 should be a $91,000 decrease, but it didn't like that. So I'm not sure. Because if it was 350,000, I guess it wants us to consider that an increase because it's more negative. I think that's a little weird. Let's see. There we go. So it wants us to consider those increases, even though I guess we do have more cost of goods sold per se. So it's just the cost of goods sold. They're writing the expenses here as a negative. Maybe what's confusing is that usually on an income statement we don't write expenses as negatives. So anyway, so that's how they want us to do it. Then they want them all as positive numbers. And then the second thing we have to do is we're going to do the percent of the increase or decrease. And so we're just going to take this amount of the change and we're going to divide it by the older year. So 210,000 divided by 700,000, that will tell us what the percentage change is. Because the older year is the base year. So we're saying it went up to 910,000 and increased by 210,000. And so if we were using a calculator, we could calculate that just by taking the amount of the increase and dividing it by the older amount, so the 2001 amount. And that's 0.3, which is 30%. We could do that with the calculator for each one, or we could use Excel and just say this number divided by this number. And then we could use our little fill tool and carry that all the way down. And then tell Excel we want a percent. It wants us to round percentages to 1 decimal place. So 26%, 34%. And there should be our percent increases. So finally, it wants us to do some a little, I guess, analysis. So it says, so we can see our net income has increased by 53.6%. So net income has increased from 2001 to 2002. Net sales have also increased. However, cost of goods sold, selling administrative expenses have increased. At a slower rate, causing strong earnings growth. So really what we're saying is, look, our sales have increased by 30%, and all of our expenses have also increased. And so sometimes if your expenses increase too much, it can really impact your growth in your net income. But we can see that our net income has increased by 53.6%. So that's what we would call strong earnings growth. So there we go. There's the first one, all done. Again, just to reiterate, to find this amount, we're just going to take the older year minus the newer year. That gives us the amount of increase or decrease. And then to find our percent, we're just going to take the amount of increase and divide it by the older year. And that's it. So let's move on to the next question. Here it wants us to do a vertical analysis. So in a vertical analysis, what we're going to do is compare each of the items by, in the case of an income statement, by sales. So sales is going to be our base amount. And we're going to compare everything else to sales. Again, I think these negative signs are going to throw us off. We're going to consider all these expenses as positives, even though we know that they do reduce our net income, but typically they're written as a positive cost of goods sold. So again, so we could do this with a calculator if we wanted to, where we could, in essence, just say, take each item and divide it by sales. In fact, I'll do that for this first one. So this would be 100% because 1.3 million divided by 1.3 million. The next one, 682,500 divided by 1,300,000, 52.5%. The next one, 617,500 divided by 1,300,000 is 47.5%. And we can keep going that way, but I'm going to set up an Excel spreadsheet that will allow us to do it much, much quicker. Let's see. So let me pull this over here. So again, I just have all of this information. There's 0, Y2. There's 20, Y1. Make it a little bigger. All right. So now I'm going to actually insert a column in between. And here will be my percent changes. And all I'm going to do for this is I'm going to divide our figure for 2002 by our sales. Now, because I want things to always be divided by sales, I'm going to put these little dollar signs, one in front of the B and one after the B. And that tells Excel that as I use my fill tool to lock in on this cell for the denominator of my division problem. So once I do that, and then I tell it I'm looking for a percent with 1 decimal, I've got all my info there. 7.5, 20, 13, 33, 14.5, 6, 20.5, 9, 11.5. I'll do the same thing here. I'll say this is going to equal this divided by this. There are little dollar signs to tell Excel to lock in on cell D2 for our denominator. Fill it, have it expressed as a percentage with 1 decimal. All right, we'll check it and make sure we didn't screw it up. Looks like didn't like my income tax expense. Or now it looks like it wants all of these negatives as negatives. So that's a little frustrating. Just figuring out what they want. All right. So finally, so the net income as a percent of sales has blank. It was 14% in the first year. Now it's 11.5. So it has decreased. All the costs and expenses other than selling expenses have maintained their approximate costs as a percentage of sales relationship between 2001 and 2002. Selling expenses as a percent of sales, however, have blank. So our selling expenses went from -16 to -20. We'll say increased as a percentage of sales. Apparently the new advertising campaign blank been successful. Since sales has increased, we'll say has been successful. The increased expense, blank produced sufficient sales to maintain relative profitability. Actually, so we're going to say it has not been successful because the increased expense has not produced sufficient sales, right? Our profitability has dropped. Thus, selling expense as a percentage of sales have increased. Let's see if it likes that. It does. All right, so that can be a little confusing how on this one it wants our negatives as negatives and before it wanted them as positives. Luckily, we have checks and we can figure out how Cengage wants us to do this before we have to do it without checks. Anyway, so good luck in getting this done and have a great day and good luck in the rest of the chapter.